"This man shouldn't even be alive," Gorak scoffed, squinting in disbelief at the screen. The Keru delegation murmured uneasily. Representatives from all surviving species of the dead worlds had gathered on Z, a neutral meeting ground where only the hardiest forms of life dared to tread, a place where the very environment itself seemed determined to kill them. The planet's brutal terrain, lethal predators, and toxic atmosphere were all challenges the delegates understood well. They had seen resilience, or so they thought, until they encountered humanity. The screen in the conference room flickered on, showing a grainy video of a thin, scarred human man walking through a blistering, hostile landscape. The sensor readings in the corner displayed deadly temperatures and wind speeds that would have felled most species. But the man just kept walking. Gorak, known for his steely determination, now appeared genuinely puzzled. "I don't understand how he can survive this," he muttered, a scar running from his forehead to his chin furrowing in confusion. "He has no armor, no toxins, no claws," another delegate added, nodding in reluctant admiration. The Kark species, notorious for their survival prowess, had assumed that they had seen it all, built to endure toxic environments and shrug off injuries that would incapacitate others. They were muscular, dense, and armored with natural defenses. They considered themselves the undisputed champions of survival in the galaxy, until they learned more about humans. A scientist named Drake hesitantly shared more unsettling information. Disturbing data indicates that humans don't just survive in hostile environments on their homeworld. They thrive. The delegates exchanged skeptical glances. Gorak, his gaze never leaving the screen, grumbled, "Earth sounds like nothing short of chaos." A delegate named Earthdrick spoke cautiously, as though struggling to believe his own words. "Earth is highly unstable, unpredictable cold and heat, active volcanoes, vast and chaotic oceans, all practically uninhabitable. But humans have adapted to every corner of it. Some even seek out its most dangerous locations for entertainment." The room fell silent. "Entertainment," a Karks muttered incredulously. They were known for testing their own limits, but to willingly court danger seemed reckless, even absurd. Irok scoffed. "They're either insane or lying." Drake, visibly hesitant, continued. "Earth meets every criterion for a death world. The atmosphere may not be poisonous, nor does it have catastrophic magnetic storms. But then why call it a death world?" someone interjected. Drake took a deep breath, pressing his tablet to display further data. "Because humans themselves are threats. They are somehow aggressive and capable, not only surviving but dominating. They form groups, build weapons, and adapt to environments faster than any species on record. They've encountered and subdued creatures that would kill others, and some they've even befriended." The screen showed a hologram of a human, surrounded by various large land animals, massive feline predators with crushing jaws and towering mammoths. Each image depicted the human standing beside these formidable creatures, calm and unafraid. Gorak's skepticism faded, replaced by a reluctant intrigue. "You say they train these beasts?" he asked. "Not just training," Drake replied, his voice dropping. "They make them companions, forming bonds. And it's not just animals. Their technology, primitive compared to ours, is adapted for any environment. Their persistence is unparalleled. They don't stop even when wounded or defeated. It's as if survival itself is ingrained in their very instincts." The Karks warriors exchanged uneasy looks. For as long as they could remember, they had considered themselves the standard of resilience. They were unaccustomed to being threatened, especially by a species without natural defenses. Just then, the doors opened and the human ambassador entered. Although his frame seemed fragile beside the massive, armored Karks heroes, there was an unsettling confidence in his eyes as he scanned the room. His calm intensity was more unnerving than any weapon. "Gentlemen," he greeted in a steady voice, speaking the Karks' language fluently, a skill that took seasoned diplomats years to master. "I appreciate the warm welcome." Irok's lip curled. "You're lucky we allowed you here, human. We don't usually waste time with soft-skinned creatures from garden planets." The ambassador merely smiled. "If you think me soft, I'd wager most species wouldn't survive long enough to have this conversation with you." Some of the Karks chuckled reluctantly, but Irok's expression remained stony. A scientist stepped forward. "Tell us, human, how does your species survive in a world without armor, claws, or fangs?" The ambassador shrugged. "We adapt. Sometimes we fight. Sometimes we wait. Survival doesn't rely on brute strength alone. True strength," he said, pausing meaningfully, "is surviving when there's no other option." The room went silent. To the Karks, survival itself was an act of strength, but humans viewed it as only the beginning. One delegate, Gorak, interrupted. "And what of your fragility? Your species is known to feel pain acutely. How do you cope?" The ambassador grew thoughtful. "We suffer, yes, but that suffering drives us. It makes us strive to protect what we have, to fight for it, to build for it. Mortality reminds us that every moment counts and that life is precious. It's what gives us strength." Gorak's gaze hardened, but he remained silent. The idea that fragility could foster resilience unsettled him, challenging his species' concept of strength. For the Karks, survival instincts were honed to protect, not endure pain. Just then, a young Karks warrior, clearly impatient, growled, "Let's see if this human is as tough as he claims." The room fell silent. To the Karks, a challenge was a serious affair. The human ambassador met the warrior's gaze unflinching. "I'm not here to prove anything," he said, but then his eyes gleamed. "But I wouldn't refuse a demonstration." Gorak held up a hand, silencing the room. This wasn't part of the diplomatic exchange, but his curiosity was piqued. The Karks warriors cleared space, forming a loose circle around the ambassador and his challenger, a formidable fighter named Kag, who was notorious for his speed and strength. Even the elders watched with pride and caution. The prospect of facing Kag seemed absurd, but the human showed no fear. The human ambassador shrugged off his jacket and stepped into the circle, wearing only a simple shirt and pants. Clearly unimpressed by the hulking warrior sizing him up all right, "Craig," he said it almost casually. "How do you want to play this?" Craig growled, cracking his knuckles with a sickening sound that resonated through the room. He sneered, as if that alone would be impossible. He crouched muscles, rippling under his armor plating. His sharp gaze fixed on the human ready to strike. The Karkses watched in silence, some in anticipation, others with pity for the human who seemed oblivious to the challenge he was facing. This wasn't just a test. It was almost a ritual among the Karak, a way to assert dominance and put other species in their place, but the humans didn't flinch. Craig lunged, a blur of armored muscle and raw power. He swung a fist the size of a boulder, aiming directly for the human's chest, fully expecting to send him flying across the room, but the human side stepped smoothly, moving with an agility that caught Siaji off guard. Siaji whirled around, eyes narrowing. He charged again this time. Faster, a blur of limbs in brute force. The human dodged each swing. Every movement was measured and precise. CRA's attacks were relentless, but the human slipped out of each one, his expression calm, almost amused. The cavalry warriors began murmuring, some exchanging skeptical glances. This wasn't the outcome they had anticipated. The human was outmatched in strength, yet somehow he was holding his ground, maneuvering around CRA's attacks with unsettling ease. Siji, panting invisibly frustrated, threw a vicious punch, aiming for the human's face, but this time the human didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped forward, catching CRA's wrist and twisting it using the Karo's own momentum against him. CRA staggered, eyes wide with shock as he was forced off balance. The room fell into stunned silence. The human released CRA and took a step back, watching him recover. Strength is in everything, remember. He said his voice was cool, and even sometimes it's about knowing when and where to strike. Craig let out an enraged snarl, lunging forward in a final reckless assault. But the human ducked, Lowe pivoted on his heel, and swung his leg around. In a sweeping motion, his foot caught Cag's ankle, and with a heavy thud, the towering Karrok warrior crashed to the ground. The Karrok stared, jaws slack, as their fiercest young warrior lay sprawled on the floor. The human extended a hand toward Craig, who glared at him with a mix of shame and fury after a tense moment. Craig grabbed the human's hand, allowing himself to be pulled up. The young warrior muttered something under his breath, grudging respect flickering in his eyes. The human ambassador turned back to the delegation, brushing off the dust from his shirt. "So, do I pass the test?" Gorak, who had watched the entire display in stunned silence, finally broke into a slow nod. "Perhaps we underestimated you?" He admitted, his voice tinged with reluctant respect. "Dick." The scientist seemed equally shaken. "You moved as though you could read his attacks before they happened." Is that training the human to smile with a faint glimmer of amusement in his eyes? Let's just say humans have learned to adapt quickly. We may not have natural armor, but we compensate with skill and strategy. The Karthoks exchanged wary glances. They had seen warriors with exceptional skill, but this was different. It wasn't just training. It was a calculated response to overwhelming force, an understanding of how to exploit even the smallest of advantages. The human had faced a Kar warrior and hadn't just survived. He had won Gorak and grunted a look of consideration, crossing his face. "Impressive human, but tell me, why do your people develop these skills? You said your world isn't a true death world. What need is there to hone such abilities?" The human leaned against the edge of the meeting table, his expression. "Thoughtful Earth might not be a death world by your standards, but survival. There isn't always easy. We face challenges both from the environment and from each other, and in a way that makes us unpredictable." The room fell silent again. The Karthoks prided themselves on being prepared for any threat or challenge, but unpredictability that was new, something outside their usual framework of strength and endurance. The human continued, his voice steady and calm. "We've learned that adaptation isn't just about the physical. It's about how we think, how we approach problems, and how we can change our strategies when things don't go as planned." The younger Karthoks shifted uneasily, while the older warriors watched with narrowed eyes. For them, the world had always been simple. Strength meant survival. But this human spoke of survival as something else entirely, a complex web of thought and action, and in that moment they began to see him and his people in a new light. One of the older Karrok delegates, a seasoned warrior with countless battles under his belt, spoke up, his tone skeptical. "If humans are as resourceful as you say, why haven't you dominated the galaxy already? Why haven't you sought to conquer and control other worlds?" The human's eyes met the warrior's unblinking. "It's not about control," he said simply. "It's about coexistence. We don't need to dominate others to feel strong. We understand the value of cooperation in AI sciences. It's what keeps us growing and evolving, because alone we're vulnerable. Together, we're unstoppable." The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the Karrok way of thinking. Cooperation was seen as a weakness, a crutch for those who couldn't stand alone. But for humans it seemed it was a strength, a form of resilience that went beyond brute force. DC's analytical mind raced as he considered this perspective. "So you're saying humans use cooperation as a form of survival?" The human nodded. "Exactly. We understand our limits. We know that there are things we can't accomplish alone, and we're willing to admit that by working together we overcome obstacles that would otherwise be impossible." The Karthoks mulled over this, each one processing the implications to admit weakness and to rely on others that went against everything they had been taught. Yet here was a creature from a so-called lesser world, standing before them alive and victorious, speaking of unity, as though it were a shield as strong as any armor. Finally, Gorak spoke again, his tone measured. Perhaps there is more to humans than we realized. You possess strength. Even if it's not the kind we understand, you have earned our respect. The human ambassador inclined his head, accepting the gesture with quiet dignity. Thank you. Respect is mutual. I came here not to challenge, but to learn, and maybe if we're open to it, we can both walk away stronger. The Karthoks delegation fell silent, each member deep in thought. For the first time, they considered that strength might not be as simple as they had believed strength. The humans had shown them could take many forms, and perhaps even the greatest Deathworlders had something to learn. But the meeting was not over yet, and the human ambassador still had one more message to deliver. The human ambassador stood in silence, sensing. He had finally earned the Karo's attention, but he knew his next words would challenge them even further. Before I leave, he said, looking around the room, there's something else. You should know about Earth. He paused, letting the weight of his statement settle. Humans aren't the only dangerous species there. The Karthoks stirred, shifting their massive forms as they glanced at each other. Gorak narrowed his eyes. A trace of suspicion in his gaze explains. He said cautiously. The ambassador continued his tone, still calm, but carrying an edge. Earth is home to countless species that would be considered lethal on any other planet. Our oceans alone are filled with creatures whose venom or strength could bring down a Karo. There are predators in our jungles that hunt in packs, creatures in our mountains that strike without warning, and plants that can immobilize or poison you with a touch. Craig snorted, clearly unconvinced. So you share your world with beasts. We all do. The ambassador smiled, a faint, knowing expression that only deepened the Karo's curiosity. True, he conceded, but on Earth we don't just live among these creatures. We've learned to coexist, sometimes to tame them, sometimes to avoid them, and when necessary, to defeat them. We aren't the strongest beings on our planet, and we aren't the fastest, but we survive because we've adapted to understand them. We've even managed to harness their strengths to our advantage. DC's eyes widened the scientist's mind, visibly racing as he absorbed the implications. You mean you use these creatures as weapons allies? The ambassador nodded in a way. For centuries, humans have partnered with animals that would otherwise be our enemies. We ride beasts that can outrun any human hunt, with creatures that can smell prey from afar, and use others to navigate the harshest terrains. Earth's life forms aren't just threats. They're part of our survival strategy. The Karthoks exchanged wary glances. This was something entirely foreign to their worldview. Karthoks didn't collaborate with other creatures. They dominated, controlled, or destroyed anything that stood in their way. But here was a species from a supposedly lesser world, describing an entirely different approach. Gorak folded his arms, his expression unreadable. Why tell us this, human? Why share these secrets with people? You barely know. The ambassador met his gaze steadily, because I believe we have more in common than you think. You Hawks understand strength better than any species in the galaxy. But what if that strength could grow even greater through unity? Humans learned long ago that true power doesn't come from conquering alone. It comes from understanding, from seeing potential where others see threats. The room fell into a contemplative silence. The Karthoks were unaccustomed to introspection, to thinking beyond survival and dominance, but the humans' words stirred something within them, a glimmer of curiosity and even possibility. Finally, one of the elder Karthoks, a battle-scarred veteran named Cruel, stepped forward. His voice was rough, filled with the wisdom of countless campaigns, and what would humans seek in return for such cooperation power territory? The ambassador shook his head, smiling slightly. We seek allies. We seek understanding. Strength is different in every world, and it takes many forms. Perhaps Karthoks and humans have something to learn from each other. We're not asking you to change. We're offering you the chance to expand your strength to see what might be possible together." Craig's expression softened his fierce pride, tempered by a new perspective. "You mean to say there is strength in acknowledging our limits, in recognizing what others can offer?" The ambassador nodded sensingly. The impact of his words, exactly even the mightiest of us, have something to gain from an ally, something to protect beyond ourselves. It doesn't make us weak, it makes us adaptable. The concept hung heavy in the air, a potent challenge to everything the Karks believed. For so long, their culture had been centered on self, reliance on an unyielding code of strength. But this human had shown them that strength. It could be broadened, that there were other ways to grow without compromising who they were. Gorak, who had remained silent for a time, finally spoke. His voice was calm and measured. This cooperation, it would be an experiment, a partnership with boundaries. We would not compromise our ways or submit to outside influence. The ambassador inclined his head. "Of course, this isn't about control. It's about possibilities, and the galaxy is wide enough for both our ways to thrive." The Carrick stood in contemplative silence. This human had come to them as a diplomat, yet he had done what no other had managed before. He had challenged their perception of strength without diminishing it. He had met them on their own terms, survived their trial, and shown them an alternative path that did not insult their pride. Finally, Goro extended his hand, a rare gesture among Cox, a symbol of respect and acceptance. "Then we shall see where this path leads, human. May our partnership bring strength to us." Both the ambassadors took his hand, gripping it firmly as equals. "May it make us both stronger." The room exhaled, the tension easing into a newfound respect. The Karks for the first time considered humans not as fragile beings, but as something much more formidable, a species that had mastered a different kind of resilience, one that held its own against even the most dangerous of worlds. As they parted ways, each side knew they had taken the first step toward a new understanding. The Karks had encountered a challenge. They hadn't anticipated a reminder that even the fiercest warriors had something to learn, and the human ambassador left, knowing that humanity had gained an ally, one that understood strength in a way no other species could. The galaxy, he thought, had just become a little less lonely and a lot more interesting.